Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy, where we try to better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. You won't be able to see my face, and I am very late this time, and this is because I have had some real technical issues, which have meant that my camera is not working. Now, I don't know if it's my camera that is broken, or if it's just a cable, or even like a port within the camera, and so I'm sorry I'm late. I've been panicking for the last 20 minutes at least. 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I've just been trying to get that sorted. Unfortunately, I've been unable to get the camera working for the debate, but the debate is going to continue anyway because, well, the show must go on. So, you will see nice pictures of jellyfish since you can't see the jellyfish that I usually have in the video. So that's how I'm going to remedy this scenario, by adding more jellyfish, because more jellyfish is always better, right? So, yeah, you'll hear our voices. You will obviously see the chat, but you will not see anything else. Really, I'm sorry about that. But there's nothing I can do about it until I get a new cable and I test out whether it's actually a cable fault or whether it's something more dire. But fingers crossed, it's just a cable. Okay. Those are indeed my pet jellyfish. I live in an aquarium. I don't actually, because aquariums are animal prisons. Which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so as you can see, the debate topic is the moral status of animals. It's a little bit more specific than that, I do believe. Although I'm not sure what my opponent necessarily thinks of animals. So, yeah. Did I blow on the cable? I didn't. But since it looks absolutely mangled, I didn't really think it would work. Right. Anyway. So I'm going to call... I actually don't know how to say his name. I'm going to have to ask him how to say his name. I'm going to call my opponent. So... hopefully, if he answers. All right. Oh, there we go. Hey, man. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Am I audible?
You're a little bit fuzzy. I'm not gonna lie to you, but yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Perhaps I can try and sort that out somehow.
No problem. It sounds like, if anything, are you using a microphone?
Yeah. I'm supposed to be using a microphone at least.
Right. I don't know what to say other than, like, if you turn the gain down on your side, it'll reduce the background noise, and I'll turn you up.
Okay. Yeah, 1 second. Is it better now?
It seems a bit better. I'm happy with that. I'll turn you up. I'll just make sure that you're coming in at a reasonable volume. Speak first, would you?
Am I better audible now?
Speak again.
Am I better audible now?
Yeah, that seems about the right volume. So, So let's do this. So, unfortunately, I was explaining in the chat that my camera's broke, so they can't see me, but that won't really affect our debate anyway. And maybe it'll just, yeah.
Should we just jump into it? Or
Yeah,
how does one go about doing this?
Well, this is the thing. So it's your proposition, wasn't it? And your proposition specifically was on that animals do not have the same moral status as humans, or an equal moral status to humans. Am I right?
Yeah, so if I recall, I caught you for the first time in some videos on stream, and you seem to be saying that they have equal moral status to human. I asked you about this, and you said, yes, indeed, you think this is the case.
Yep.
This seems rather wrong to me, so then I suggested that we debate the proposition you just presented.
Yeah, that's fine. Obviously, me saying equal moral status to humans, we've got to flesh out what we both mean by equal moral status. We mentioned in were mentioned in the DMs, basically that duty does not equate moral status, and we both agree on that. So duty can come from other things than simply moral status itself. Like, for example, the moral status of my mom and somebody else's mom may be equal, as they are both human in this respect, but I do not have the same duties to one human necessarily as to another. So, I might have the responsibility of making sure that my mom is safe and healthy, but not necessarily everyone's mom. So, would you agree with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think here we might be getting into something that we're going to touch upon downstream in the debate, which is whether moral status is always like the status of another person to whom you own duties is always impartial or partial. So it seems to me that you're trying to make a distinction between you might have partial duties or like duties based on partial reasons generated by partial moral status and versus impartial. I myself will agree that you have special duties to, for example, your mother that you don't have to mothers, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that duty will be grounded in the moral status of that person, and that is an
I would
impartial
agree.
moral status.
I would agree. So I would agree. So, like, for example, this would be like the separation between something like right and rights. So the rights of an individual are based on the actual instancing of the actual instancing of right within that individual. So that would be like the ethical value that exists within them, what they are, rather than anything else. But the actual like law itself would be an expression of that ethical value, not the ethical value itself. And that way, there is an epistemological distinction. And in our institutions, that can come out in ways which reflects certain duties rather than just, duty itself. So, like, in a Kantian sense, like the formal duty would be like something abstract, and it would be like do your duty, but like it lacks content. But in maybe a more like Hegelian system, duties would be an expression of this abstract, or like rather the abstract would be reasoned from these duties, but these duties are themselves instances of that universal duty that we have, and I think that we'd probably both agree on that. Like that kind of there is like an overarching point to be made about moral consideration and moral status, or ethical consideration and ethical status, which underpins talking about duty or rights or any other sort of ethical conditions.
Yeah, so I think we are agreeing here. I think like here we're touching upon that something that might be a slight difficulty in this debate, which is that, yeah, we come from different schools. If I understand correctly, you're from the continental school.
Yes, I am. Are you analytic?
Yes, I'm analytic. But let me just throw something back at you and see whether you agree with that, and then I think suggest whether
before we get into that, how big is analytic versus continental philosophy because you're a PhD researcher in like Stockholm, right?
Yes.
And I will link your Twitter as well in the description. You're a PhD researcher in Stockholm. So what is Sweden like for analytic versus continental philosophy?
I think here in Sweden the divide is quite stark.
Right.
So we have like the majority of the schools do kind of like pure analytical philosophy. And then there's one school that does like more pure continental called Södertörn.
Oh, that's weird.
What uni are you in?
Well, the uni that I go to currently, I'm actually in the process of transferring. Fingers crossed, everything's working out. I'm going from a very analytic school to a very continental school. So where I have me degrees from, like the ones I've completed, like me bachelor's and me master's. One was from a very continental school. My bachelor's was from Newcastle University, which is like super continental. Like the entire department is continental philosophers. It's actually the most continental university in the UK. Then Durham is now a continental school, and it was continental while I was there, but only in name, really. It was still very analytic. It's kind of like it almost felt like there was a split between the staff. There was like some continental, some analytic, and it was quite nice in that respect because I did pick up some analytic philosophy there. like a bit of Russell, bit of Geach, that kind of thing. Um,
Mm.
and then um, I'm not going to say what universities I'm at or going to now because it's just a terrible idea to do as a public figure. But
Oh,
I once tried to do like a talk online, and had loads of people raid the talk that I was doing for another university, for my university actually, and it was terrible. Anyway, but then, but you trolls and shit. But the one I go to now is very analytic, like exclusively analytic, which is why I'm transferring to a one which is far more continental.
right, I
Um,
see.
but mostly, almost exclusively, I engage in continental philosophy. I know some analytic philosophy, but like the basics, really, very, very much so.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think like so. I haven't really had like a discussion and or debate with a continental philosopher before. So I guess we will just like see how this pans out. But I'm confident that when there are terminological gaps, we can bridge those gaps.
Well, we can do our best in any ways. It's
Yeah.
all we can do. So, um,
Yes, I was
is
just
there
gonna throw something back at you to see if that's
is there any
roughly
is there any
what
chance
you.
as well? Actually, is there anything that you could do to your audio that would make it less echoey? Because it does sound like you're in a big, like it sounds like you're in a concert hall. Like it's understandable, but it is distorting your voice.
Make it less echoey.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think if you could turn the gain down, like I don't know what kind of mic you're using, but it sounds like you're using like maybe it's like a condenser mic, and it's like the gain's up too high, or it even sounds like you're underwater in some respects. It's that distorted at times.
Okay, weird. Is it better now?
Um, Speak a little bit more. Sorry.
Do you think the sound is better now?
I mean, it is a little bit better, but I wouldn't say it's that much better.
Hmm.
It's mostly an echo. I don't know if you've got gain. Have you got the control of? Can you control the gain of your microphone at all?
Yeah, so I don't know what that means. I'm not very technologically apt.
All right. Do you know what kind? Are you using like a? What kind of microphone are you using? Is it like a um? Is it just like a plug and play mic? Like what kind of mic is it?
I think it's supposed to be a very good mic called Rode that you use like to film stuff with.
Okay, so it's a Rode. Is it a Rode? Wait a minute. Okay, so wait. If it's a Rode mic, I'm assuming that you're using like a Rode. Actually, what kind? What do you know? What kind of Rode mic it is? Is it like a Rode Video Mic Pro? And
Yes, exactly.
okay, if you're using a Rode Video Mic Pro, does it have a dial on the back?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I turned the dial down, so it's supposed to be on its lowest.
Okay, you've turned the dial down.
Well, let me see. Let's try turning it up and see if that's better. Is this preferable?
That actually sounds a bit better. Speak.
Yeah, just testing out the microphone.
Yeah, that actually does sound a bit better.
Okay, cool. I turned it up. I thought it would sound worse, but okay. Hopefully that's better.
Yeah, that is actually quite a bit better. I'm not gonna lie. And you want to, after this, you're gonna. I suggest go and fiddle with your settings because your mic should do better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm super this. But I will
I have
just
that mic. I mean, I'm not using that
well,
mic right now because I'm actually using the fancy as fuck mic, which is why like. But that was totally because like one of my subscribers was just like get the fanciest mic you can. He's like an absolute lad.
hmm,
But like I have that mic for videos, but it sounds like it's either that you are too far away from it. I don't know if you far away from it.
no, I'm super close.
You're super close. It's picking up. It's like it's a super cardioid mic. It shouldn't be picking up anything in the room really, except for you. Um, like
Well, let me double check one thing. And that will proceed. Let's see.
yeah, it
No,
does.
no,
Like,
I'll.
are you
Sorry.
sure? It's definitely that mic that's being used as well. So like, make sure that Discord is using that mic to come through, and not like your laptop or something.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's using that mic.
It does sound better ever since you turned it down. Turned it up. So that makes me think that it is. And is it maxed out on that as well?
Yeah, it is maxed out.
See, that's better. To be honest, I think it's fine now.
Okay. Perhaps I'm
Um,
just in an echo room.
yeah, it's
Hopefully this will work.
yeah. It's like, if you go to a bigger room as well, if you do get the chance, the biggest room possible. Small rooms with very flat walls will be the worst. I have a room in my house that's just, if you like clap your hands together, it sounds as if someone's smashing plates. It's just the worst.
Okay, I'm moving to another room. Cool.
Yeah,
Is
bigger.
this room better?
Speak now, there. Sorry.
Perhaps this room is better.
Much better. There we go. There we go.
Okay, great, cool. Yeah, so I was just in the small room before. I gotta figure that out.
Yeah,
Alright.
there's nothing you can do about it unless you want to sound treat that room.
Mm.
It's just the way it is. Like anyway, sorry. We'll get back into the debate now. I think you sound okay now.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so yeah, I was just gonna throw something back at you to see if we're on the same page. So I agree that I think that, for example, that the fact that a child is your child gives that child special moral that makes you have special duties towards that child.
Yep.
Just as the fact that an animal friend is your animal friend makes you have special duties towards that animal. But I would say that the reason you have special duties is towards this animal friend and towards your child is because of the fact that they have special moral status. And I'm deeply skeptical that the special moral status that they have is going to be because they have like some unique partial moral status towards you. It rather seems that it's going to be the fact that there's some form of impartial moral status that we all can recognize that in these types of relationships we would all have this relationship to this child or to this special animal
Yeah.
friend.
The way
So I'm trying to get at.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
sorry.
yeah. So the way I like to think of this is that it's really just a normative point, like in terms of how we construct our individual duties rather than what is duty itself. So in terms of duty itself, that would be based on a fundamental principle like the expression of subjectivity. So what we are attempting to achieve is freedom or the expression of subjectivity. And then our individual duties respect the best way of doing that contextually, in a way that makes sense to us and our own circumstances, in a way that if made universal, for example, would allow for that principle to be actually expressed. So this is the understanding that the individual's duties is given context by that society and their institutions, because each institution has a role to play in the broader, greater system. So this is like the normativity that exists in our like everyday lives. And as much like my responsibility to my mother is not just my responsibility to my mother, but it's our responsibility to our mothers, which is given concrete. It's given concrete individualization within my experience. It's like it's my mother because I am the one performing the duty, but the duty itself is actually a duty that is universal and applicable to
Yeah,
everyone.
okay, yeah. So it's a duty that we all have to our mothers,
Yeah,
but in this specific instance of the duty, it's a duty that you have to your unique mother.
exactly. And in that sense, the impartiality of the duty. So the reason that we have this duty in the first place comes from an underlying, or as you say, impartial duty, which is a duty towards something else. Now, I would say that was a duty towards the expression of our subjectivity. Yeah. So I'll be
But
like,
yeah, do you think that this underlying duty can be there without there being something about the duty bearer, like them having some feature upon which grounds that duty?
oh no. So I do think that there is some sort of ethical foundation ontologically. So I think there has to be some sort of like metaphysical characteristic from which these duties are, respected against. And
Exactly, yeah.
and like in Hegel, this would be, consciousness.
Yes, cool. Okay, well, can we just pause there? Yeah, so
Yeah.
then it seems that we're in agreement that we're going to have different types of duties, but those duties are fundamentally going to be something that is explained by virtue of making reference to certain features and or properties which the specific duty bearers have.
Yeah. So like yeah, there's like an ontology of like so like the what is the foundations of like ethical ontology? Like so like speaking of which, actually what is so I'm a Hegelian. So I'm gonna ground this in consciousness and yeah, like I'm gonna ground it in consciousness and what would maybe is the will if I was to use terms like that. So like a conscious willing individual. So like a being which is conscious of its surroundings, so has sense experience, sentience.
Yeah, sentience. Okay.
Who is that is a value relationship within the world. So I'd say sentience implies positive and negative values, which are given to the agent as positive or negative. You know, like pain and pleasure. And in so much as it has those experiences, it cannot help but value positive and you know well actually cannot help but value positive and negatively as positive and negative in that respect, but in the sense that it cannot help but seek good experience and avoid bad experience. Now animals, this is given to them, like they don't have the capacity to construct a means end relationship, you know, like with themselves. They can't posit an end which is outside of this sense experience. They just feel pain or pleasure and are motivated by it. Whilst humans um, can find greater meaning in their lives. They can find something that is beyond, like they may suffer for a higher cause, for example, or resist the temptation of pleasures for, again, a higher cause or some other greater purpose. But that greater purpose, I would say, always relates back to the experiences of individual agents or individual subjects, rather.
Yeah, so I think I'm following. Yeah, I think what you said so far makes sense.
Cool. I'm glad.
Yeah, so, but do you think there's anything else we should clarify, or should we jump into the substance?
I can't think of anything else that would necessarily need to be clarified, but I'm sure if it comes up, we can go through it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, because I don't have necessarily a positive view in this debate. That is to say, I don't have a fleshed out theory of moral status which I subscribe to. But I'm here to argue the negative of the proposition, right? So I don't need that to argue the negative.
I mean, it is helpful to be consistent though, because like I think Hegel actually said.
Well,
So
I'm gonna be consistent. Don't
no,
you worry
but
about that.
I mean, in the sense that it's not just about like logical consistency. So like, I think like skepticism's easy. Philosophy's hard, and philosophy is a positive claim, and I think skepticism is a negative claim. Now, philosophical skepticism exists, and I think that skepticism is necessary in philosophy. Don't get me wrong; I'm not being dogmatic here, but I don't think that you're actually doing philosophy unless you're willing to make a positive claim. Do you know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I perhaps I wasn't communicating clearly. So yeah, when I say that I don't have a like fully fleshed out theory of moral status, that is to say, for example, there are certain criteria that I would want to have a theory of moral status would fulfill. Such, for example, we would want an explanation about disabled people, etc., which is satisfactory. And I don't consider myself as having such a theory, but I'm not just here to argue the proposition that the animals don't have the same moral status as humans. I also am willing to argue in the affirmative that there are features and facts about humans which make them have unique moral status in comparison to animals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good, because otherwise I think that it's kind of like I think every theory is only superseded by a theory which has more explanative power. Do you know what I mean? So
Yes.
so
Yes, great.
so as long as you can present something which you believe has some form of, you know, makes some sort of positive claim and gives explanatory power, then I have no issue.
Yes, cool, great. Yeah, and I guess we should be clear from the start how I view this debate regarding burdens. So it seems to me that the common sense view is that animals don't have equal moral status to human. And I take this to be a view which is held by the majority of even vegans and vegans philosophers. This is just my opinion from surveying the literature. Then if this is indeed the case, and I hope you grant this is the case, then the opposite view ought to be considered one which is doing something radical. And hence the burden in this debate ought to be on the person arguing for the proposition that animals have fully equal status to humans. I think this is important for three reasons. First, because that means then if this is the case that you cannot make equally strong appeals to like common sense morality or common sense intuitions. I think secondly, this means that you have a higher evidential threshold for your claims, given that you're going against the grain. And I think thirdly and finally then, and importantly, it's not enough for you to give like sufficient reasons to believe in your view, i.e. the proposition, but you must also simultaneously explain away the common sense moral intuitions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I don't really have an issue with that. I mean, I'm usually on the back foot anyway, being a Hegelian. So, like, you know,
so you're used to this. This is
yeah,
just
this is just the standard, really. It's kind of like
okay.
I don't mind like obviously fleshing. I think that we all have a burden of proof upon where to flesh out our positions when we're making like a positive claim anyway. So
Yes.
I was ready for that. I think that the only thing like and I think any appeal to I'm you know, I'm not gonna lie. I never accept an appeal to sort of common sense anyway. So, if I was to make such an appeal, just tell us I'm being a dick.
Okay. Well, okay. Perhaps this is in continental analytical divide. I mean, I think like common sense morality is like important, right? Because is where we start our inquiries into the ethical domain.
Oh no, I think common sense is important in the sense that I think that what is reflected, and it's not like a continental analytic divide because I mean like don't get me wrong, like the common sense school, like which is I think different to what we're necessarily talking about, is probably more analytic. You know, the Scottish sort of origins of it, but you know the reality is that what I'm really talking about when I talk about common sense is that I think like you know shared in both traditions. I think if you look back to something like Plato, where he says like you know people are easily won over by bad arguments, and that you know and like you know he references the ship of fools, you know, without a sailing without a captain. I think that people sometimes have agreed and consented to absurdity. Nazism being a great example.
Mm.
And I think that it's the philosopher, like, I can't remember if it was, I think was it Voltaire? Is it Voltaire or is it Spinoza? I actually can't remember who said this. I cannot think of, I do not know how to be a philosopher without being a disturber of the peace. I think that I think the reality is that when we do engage in philosophy, it's not necessarily to be like radically confronting the common sense notions, but we can't take them at face value. Like if I did say that the ethical, like I'm all into lawfulness. I think that the ethical institutions of our society have been built from a rational development, and that the individuals in our society are rational agents reflecting those reasons that have developed through history. So when I know that there is a value in those judgments made by average everyday individuals just living their lives. But I don't think you can rely on the average Joe as evidence. I guess that's the kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so perhaps this might become important down the line, but I'm just going to stake my position right now so you're aware of it.
No problem.
I do think that if it's the fact that, for example, we start with a phenomenon and we want to explain kind of like the moral situation at hand, and we have some intuitions about what is the case, and then we start, for lack of better description, philosophizing about it. And then through our inquiry, we get a result which is very, very against the grain. It's like far away from where we started with our common sense moral intuitions. Then that's not evidence that where we have ended up is wrong. But it does seem then that you have an additional burden to explain why our ordinary moral intuitions at hand were so misguided, given that it seems to be the case that our ordinary moral intuitions have some truth tracking capacity, and also given that it seems to be the case that the majority of your fellow human agents and fellow philosophers have reached a different conclusion. So that's the way I take.
Maybe I do think that moral intuitions, like saying that they do have a truth tracking capacity, like is a bit begging the question. You'd have to instantiate that as well. But then at the same time, I'm willing to say that you'd also, to make the claim that everyone's moral intuitions have been off the mark is a positive claim, and I have to make a claim in relation to moral intuitions, one way or the other, and I think that we would both need that. So in I'm happy to do it anyway, but I think that like relying upon intuition, I won't let anyone rely upon intuition.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. But then let's pause this for now and perhaps take it up when it
becomes
comes
relevant. Up. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, my view is rather simply that human beings have higher moral status than animals, and that by virtue of their higher moral status, humans ought to be prioritized in our moral calculation, which is simply to say that when deciding what to do in complex situations, we have more reasons, stronger reasons, and unique reasons to prioritize humans in comparison to animals.
Based on their moral status.
Based on their moral status.
Not necessarily our normative reflection of their moral status in general. So like... I
don't know what the latter means there.
So, in other words, simply because they are humans, they are given precedence, not because, or something about their humanity exists as ethically relevant in a way that gives them moral priority over animals, rather than like, it's not simply that we are the same species and so have a greater obligation to our species, or and like other humanoid, for example, species we would not share that same priority with. Let's say the Klingons or something came about.
It's the fact that humans have certain features that it's certainly plausible that other agents out there in the universe have.
Yeah.
But it's specifically that they have these features, and I think that animals lack these features, which means that although I think animals have moral status and deserves to be part of our moral calculus, they ought to be deprioritized in comparison to humans.
Okay, and we would agree though that in terms of our reflections of humans and animals in this respect, if I was to say that like a vegan could turn, or anyone who's arguing for the equal moral status of animals, but I think they would be vegan if they're consistent, but we'll get onto that later. If they are arguing for the equal moral status of animals or ethical status of animals, then what we would say is that you could say that they have equal ethical status, but my duties to one or the other can prioritize either. So, for example, as I say, a member of my family over or any given individual against my mother or something like that, or a member of my family. So we can see that like duty is not just informed by status, but perhaps by greater context. And in which case, a vegan may prioritize humans over animals, but not because of the conditions of their moral status.
Yeah, so I think I'm following. So what you're saying is that even if it were to be the case that animals and humans do have equal moral status, let's say you are a vegan who supports such a view, then you can still find superfluous reasons that don't relate to moral statushood to prioritize humans in specific situations. So you might, for example, just have like some psychological reasons such that you would feel worse if it were to be the case that you didn't prioritize human, or it would make your life more difficult, or reasons such as that.
Yeah, it could be ethically relevant as well. So like it could create a normatively worse circumstance, even if the meta-ethical conditions of their value are the same. So if I was to point towards sentience, both animals and humans are both sentient, but in terms of, let's say, saving a child versus a dog in a house fire will have societal ramifications and normative ramifications, which reflect not just the moral value of the subjects involved, but the normative conditions of society.
Yes, I think that makes sense to say. Although I think once we reach the proof in the pudding, I think we're gonna have a dispute here if I'm correctly able to predict how this debate will unfold. But it seems to me that we're so far along a good path. So I think injunction, perhaps it's time for you to then defend the proposition at hand.
Yeah, so in other words, I would say that sentience is valuable in and of itself because it is value, in the sense that it is the ontological instantiation of a value response within nature. So in other words, before sentience, there is no conscious awareness of value ontologically. It does not exist. It is in sensation and sentience that we arrive at a value relationship within nature in which a being evaluates positively or negatively its surroundings and objects that it comes into contact with. It has pleasure responses and it has pain responses. Until that point, there is no evaluative process. After that point, we can see the development of self-consciousness, sapience, greater overall self-awareness, and we could even create a division within that. So you could have animals which are self-conscious in the sense that they pass the mirror test, but they are not self-aware or have identity in a linguistic sense. So they don't have they aren't able to metaphysically hold themselves as an object of their own consciousness. So they're conscious of objects, they're not conscious of their own subjectivity. And that would be, what some people would call self-awareness, some people would call self-consciousness, and, we'll try and get past the semantics there. That self-consciousness exists in humans and allows us to engage in ethics, but rather it is actually fundamentally produced, it is produced fundamentally by our engagement in ethics. It is upon understanding other people and understanding ourselves through their perception, understanding that they can see the world in a way that I can't, understanding that my experience of the world is not the only experience of the world, but only my sense experience of the world. I realize that in the eyes of the other, who resists my judgments and resists my desires. So this is where I would say would be the foundation of ethics, and this would be psychological recognition. Or mutual recognition. Now, this allows us to engage in any epistemological field. It's necessary for us to understand that we can modify the givenness, quote unquote, of nature, the sense certainty of nature, and instead posit different theories of how nature functions and how we ought to interact with nature. It allows us to construct things like tools. We can see that a rock doesn't have to be an inert object, but can be used in a way that for hammering things. We can understand that.
Can I pause you a bit here?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because I think I got a lot of what you were saying. So the argument you're making, or like the analysis you're offering, is that seems to be something like this. Sentience is valuable because sentience is the condition upon in which like ethics arrive in our ability to like feel pain and pleasure, and from which the subjectivity comes. And given that sentience is like the condition of all of these things, all value is in sentience, and animals clearly have sentience, even though some animals might not be self-aware, they are sentience, and hence animals have the moral status that is inherent to being a sentient creature.
Yes.
Is this the argument you're making?
Yes. I would say that they have subjectivity, but they don't have agency, ethical agency. Yes. They're not capable of engaging in a reciprocal ethical relationship.
Yes.
Which would be so I would say that animals have patienthood, as do all humans.
But not agenthood, yeah.
But not agenthood, yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm glad that those are also terms in continental philosophy. I think they're useful terms.
I have taken those from Regan, so...
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I think... do you want to provide like more analysis to further justify your claim? You can do that. Otherwise, I think what I could do is I could argue against some of those claims. Then I could offer my position, and then we could have a comparative debate.
Yeah. Trying to think if there's anything else that would be relevant. Yeah, I think the only things I would say is that metaphysically, I would say that what exists in the senses is what consciousness can then extract, well, or interpolate within a syllogistic reasoning. So what we have is our experience of the world. Then we can posit some sort of middle term, some sort of explanation or relationship of within that experience. This would be like what we do in terms of self-consciousness when we talk about what we are and so on like that. But in epistemological terms, a lot of the time in like syllogistic terms, this would be like if I talk about some property of my senses that I've gained from sense experience, and then I don't know, like I talk about what like an aspect of that and how it relates to another property. So let's say Socrates is a man, all men are mortal. Socrates is mortal. In that syllogism, I have the first term, Socrates is a man. Now, we can get into language and whether obviously those terms are actually applicable. But before we get that deep, I just want to point out that there are attributes to Socrates which I am trying to reason out. So I've taken my sense experience. I then go from that sense experience and I posit a universal sort of essence or some sort of relationship within that sense experience, and I then follow it to a conclusion. So like, if P then Q, P Q, and in that, everything that existed in terms of I want to say substance, but that's incredibly Aristotelian and Hegelian. But all the substance that exists in the conclusion also existed in the first term. So in my senses, or in my universal moral principles, they are given meaning against the reality from which I began reasoning from. They don't make real moral or ethical reality. They are extrapolated from our experience. They aren't producing an experience. They aren't emergent. They are, they are developing maybe, but they aren't. But they have their metaphysical reality within our experiences. I just wanted to make that kind of clear. So yeah.
Okay. Cool. So I think the first thing I just want to note, and it might be me who's like failing to track here, but it just seems to me that at this point in time, you have offered what I take to be a good and a strong argument for why animals have moral status and for why the type of moral status they have is in fact one that is considerable. It doesn't seem to me that you've offered reasons for believing that humans doesn't have higher moral status, because it seems to me that to provide such an argument you must also explain away why the other relevant, or like why other seemingly relevant properties and features of humans are in fact not relevant. So for example, why it is not the case that humans' capacity for reasons, humans' capacities to be self-aware, humans' capacities to view themselves as an object moving in time and have like future-oriented preferences and have higher order preferences and stuff like that should not be valuable to the determination of moral status. So I guess that before I like argue against any specific claim you make, it seems to me that you must further flesh out the argument at hand in order to fully defend the proposition.
If you want us to point that out, yeah, no problem. So as I was saying about the first term versus the middle term, I see the propagation of self-consciousness and these properties of the agency of an individual as being built on the subjectivity of the animal. So humans are animals who contain sentience, who are sentient and have subjectivity. But humans are also agents in that they are self-conscious. That self-consciousness is a reflective process on the being that already exists within their subjectivity. They are not positing anything ontologically separate from that original subjectivity. They are instead taking a new viewpoint from it. And so what is ethically considerable in the agent has come from subjectivity. Agency is not a agency allows for a relationship between the self and the other, which mediates and changes their existence in how they act and behave. But it does not posit a different value relationship with the world, or a different way to evaluate the world. The evaluation that the foundations of positive and negative experience exist in the subjectivity that is universal to animals and humans, and not to the agency that exists in the human. Because the agency that exists in the human is not a metaphysical entity distinct from the subjectivity of a human, but really subjectivity considering itself.
Subjectivity considering itself. Okay, wait. So yeah, at this point, I can fully admit I'm starting to have trouble following. So I'm just gonna try to throw back what you are saying in my language and see if that sticks.
No problem.
So is the reason for why humans don't have higher status than animal that all of these features about humans, such as, to use your term, their agency, are going to be built on or reduced down to facts about the subjectivity of their sentience, and hence, given this, it is only the sentience that matters for determining moral status.
Yeah, so the moral status is reducible to sentience, not agency. The agency is just a form of being, or a form of a form of life rather than.
Okay, yeah, but here, so I guess here it just seems fair to me to ask, not to sound like a skeptical asshole here, and I can give my position soon, but it seems fair to me to ask, why should it be the case that just because agency is hypothetically reducible down to sentience? Sorry, I shouldn't say hypothetically. Let's just grant that agency, it's probably reducible down to sentience in the sense that you couldn't have agency if you didn't have sentience. But it doesn't seem there to be any unique reason to believe that everything that is relevant about agency is going to be explained in terms of what is relevant about sentience. This seems just to be the standard mistake of confusing enabling conditions with causal conditions. So it's true that the sentience of beings is the enabling conditions for example, agency or rationality. But that doesn't mean that agency and rationality doesn't have unique causal properties in terms of what they can cause in terms of status. So, for example, by virtue of explanatory analogy, I mean, it's true that everything that is, that in some sense, everything about human behavior can be reduced down to the movements of atoms. This is just trivially true given the world we live in. But this doesn't mean that when we're seeking to explain the behavior of humans, that is an explanation that is going to be made in terms of the movements of atoms. Because although atoms and the way in which they move are the enabling conditions for the human behavior, it's not the proper causal condition. So it just seems that there has to be an independent reason for why it is indeed the correct way of understanding moral status is to reduce, for example, this seemingly status relevant properties such as agency down to sentience. And the reason there cannot just be that, sentience is what enables agency.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there. I guess I just want to throw this out there. I certainly wouldn't say human behavior can be boiled down to atoms.
I can just give another example.
No, it's fine. That is fine. I just want to let you know, I'm an idealist and not a physicalist in that, so I'm not going to agree with material reductionism. But I would say, it's not obviously that's not so relevant. But what I would say is that I can see that so for example, I would say that agency had a causal relationship within the subject to modify their experiences. So, like, I could say that the self-consciousness of the individual actually changed their psychological relationship with the object, which is precisely what self-consciousness is. It's a modification of the being, like the metaphysical being of a human or an animal. But what I would say that in that modification, the only reason that we would give a value relationship is in the same sense experience that a human or an animal experiences. It's a modification or a change of the sentience of the animal. So like humans can suffer psychological tortures that animals can't. Animals can't suffer existential dread in the same way that humans can. Precisely because of this causal relationship between agency and the animal's subjectivity. Humans.
Okay, wait, pause there. So, but if that's true, then doesn't it just trivially follow from that humans have higher moral status?
It doesn't. So I'll explain. So that humans can suffer differently does not mean that humans' suffering is ontologically distinct. It's not their agency which makes them suffer. Their suffering is within their sentience. It is in their value relation in the world, definitionally. The agency is causal in the sense that it gives rise to modes of suffering and forms of suffering which were priorly it was incapable of actually engaging in. To give this maybe more metaphysical characteristic, if we were to give if we were to put this in sort of like the cause of the suffering is like the cause of the pleasure and pain responses is the sentience. That is the cause. The ways in which that it can develop is related to the agency or I guess I keep wanting to go and say like something like formal cause or I would say let's say the formal cause of an animal and a human are the same. The final cause of a human and an animal are not. So if you know your Aristotle, you'll know that I'm saying essentially, not in the sense that they share the same exact form.
Oh yeah, I just want to say so whenever you say something like if you know your Aristotle, if you know your Hegel, just assume that I don't know anything about this because I come from this super analytical tradition where we don't read that much history. I mean, I know my Aristotle, but just assume. Okay. It would be easier if you just assume that I don't know this stuff.
Okay, so I would say in that we are all sentient, and because we are all sentient, that is the value relationship we have with the world, right? The way that it develops and the way
I'm gonna just pause to see if I can make this simpler for myself, because right now, I'm still not. I still haven't heard anything to convince me that the proper way of explaining things in terms of moral status is to identify the foundation upon which all moral status originates from and have that be the sole determinator of moral status. But right now what I'm confused about is, and which you're trying to explain to me, and you're doing a very admirable job in that, so it's the burden of not understanding is on me. It's to me that you're kind of conceding that there's something by virtue of humans being humans which makes them able to suffer more than animals can do by virtue of them being animals. We can pick a specific species of animals, but that does not mean that humans have higher moral status by virtue of them having this property, which means that they have inherent capacities to suffer more than a given species of animal. And that, to me, I don't get. Why wouldn't that follow?
So I don't think humans can suffer more.
Okay, sorry. It seemed to me that you said that
given
that humans have this agency of reflection, they have this ability to suffer more and differently than animals can suffer.
Differently, sorry. Yes. I think that in terms of we can suffer in different ways to animals, but not more than animals. So, for
Okay,
example,
can we? Yeah,
in many
yeah, for
ways, so like just to give this sort of like a fleshed out response, if we were to look at, let's say, something which is, we could say that humans most likely suffer, a great deal more in certain scenarios when, like, take for example the Holocaust. Those individuals in the
yeah.
Holocaust faced a horrific existential issue, not just being killed. And many of them, for example, experience things like losing your faith. Suffered altruistically. They watched their family suffer, and so they empathetically suffered. That they faced existential issues
And
in that.
also, presumably, they were like aware of the fact that they were suffering, so their suffering was like being double counted in a very real way.
Well, I don't think that awareness of your suffering makes suffering being double counted, and I'll say this why. So it can, but it can also do the exact opposite, and I think that's embodied in the philosophy of Stoicism. Becoming aware of your
Yeah, yeah,
suffering
okay, yeah,
gives
okay.
you the
But I mean, generally speaking, humans tend to, suffer over the fact that they're suffering. Yeah, but we were just listing some facts. I
no.
mean,
I
all
don't.
of
I
the
don't
facts you
think
listed.
no. I think that like tendency is dependent upon the human and how they psychologically have been developed. Some humans react to suffering with resolve. Some humans, and you can even see this in the very same people who I'm talking about in the Holocaust. Many individuals reacted in numerous different ways to the exact same scenarios. You can look at even, for example, the way that when the Nazis invaded Russia, the response that the Russians met, even like on a psychological cultural difference, the response that the Russians gave in terms of when they were being rounded up versus the responses that, like, for example, people in Poland gave, and and these like cultural differences played a role. Religious differences play a big role. Do you believe you are going to an afterlife? Is death something that you fear or not? And
Yeah, okay,
what if
yeah,
death is something
I'm
you?
sorry. I think this is, yeah. So I mean, this is just something we're gonna disagree about. But it wasn't really important. I was just trying to add another example. So I'm sorry for interrupting there. You were listing ways in which humans can suffer differently from animal, but you were gonna explain why that doesn't mean that humans can suffer more. Let's
Mm-hmm.
just continue there.
Yeah. So what I would say ultimately is that in terms of these different modes of suffering, it is the senses, it is the human's sense experience, it is the feelings that the values contained and then retrospectively analyzed again. So a human that is aware of that suffering, let's say that they're aware of their emotional suffering, they can then reason out that suffering, which modifies the experience. And then that reasoned out suffering becomes the new experience from which they can reason again. That can go positively or negatively. You can fall into existential dread. You can fall into psychological disassociation. It's commonly known that individuals in very difficult scenarios have a defense mechanism which makes them go numb, emotionally numb, which comes with a plethora of other problems later on. But it has its modulation upon human experience. So in terms of how we actually engage with our experience, what is the experience is the sense. It is the unity of value information that is presented to us. It's not something that we it's not something that we are that is outside of our sentience. It is in our senses that we experience, and I think that's definitional. Like, we don't reason out pain, we feel pain, whether it's emotional or whether it's physical. Whether how it is going to be expressed can be causally influenced by our agency, but it is ultimately reducible to our subjectivity, our sentience.
Yeah. So wait. Well, it seems to me that you're listing all of these different ways in which humans can suffer, uh, in, but animals can't suffer. So you have the animal holocaust going on in farm factory meat, and then you have the World War II holocaust. Then you listed the ways in which Jewish people and the Romans, everyone who was involved, could suffer differently than animals. So we
Mm-hmm.
all agree that animals and the humans, can suffer while experiencing the Holocaust due to the kind of torture they are about to
Face, yeah.
uh, face.
No,
But
experience,
then,
yeah.
for example, and I take it we will agree that like humans have the disposition to suffer more than animals by virtue of the fact that humans can understand themselves as beings who are about to be murdered and who are about to lose their family and
Mm-hmm.
have lost their god.
So they can, yeah,
Something
like
like
they
that.
can have the anticipation
Yeah,
of suffering. Like, yeah, I mean, like that's
yeah.
not more
Okay.
suffering.
Wait.
That's
Yeah, just pause, please.
uh,
But why then? I'm still not following why. So they have this disposition, and they have a disposition which animals don't have, and these dispositions allow them to suffer in other ways. Now,
mm-hmm.
so then it just seems to trivially be the case that in hypothetical cases, in terms of like the pain pleasure of basic sentience, human and animal, we can scale that up equally for an animal and a human. But then there are these other dispositional ways in humans can suffer. We can add that on, which means that humans suffer more. Which means that given this disposition, it seems that we to be the case that we have reasons to believe that humans have higher moral
It doesn't
status than
necessarily
animals.
mean that humans suffer more. I don't know why you're making that jump. You don't have to like. So, for example, it's not that a human subjectivity is like it's not like that a human faces an animal's life and then also a human's life is added on top of it, and so it has um this double dose of pain or pleasure. Quite the contrary. The subjectivity itself is what's being conditioned here. It is the same subjectivity that they are feeling. The difference is that the human, when a human experiences something like existential dread and an animal does not, it's suffering in a way that the animal cannot suffer, true, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's suffering more. Like you can have humans who suffer less precisely because they are. I give you that
Yeah.
example. And
No,
so like
so I agree that
so
humans
so
could
yeah,
suffer less
so and
to
but
some of the
it's not
mechanisms you explained.
but
But it also seems to be that humans can suffer more
no,
by
it's
virtue
if I
of the
may,
very same mechanisms that allow humans to suffer less.
it's not that they are suffering more or less in terms of they can suffer they can suffer in ways and prevent suffering in ways animals cannot. Okay, it's not necessarily that they are sensing or experiencing some form of suffering that um animals do not have an equivalent experience of. And there's no way to kind of know whether an animal does face or does not face the same amount of suffering. For example, we see that animals, they do have emotional responses to their kin, right? So you see like cows cry out in some sort of maternal instinct and things like that. Now, it mightn't be the same as, for example, a human who has that same response, but sometimes the human's responses nullifies or changes the experience. But two grieving mothers are not necessarily experiencing different things in terms of their actual value experiences. And what's important to recognize here is I don't have access to those experiences themselves. I don't know if someone is experiencing like 5 sense value or 10 or 20. There is no qualitative way in which to enter someone's mind and feel their being. I only know that they are feeling, and that those feelings are positive or negative in a way which is really only correspondent to the only thing I can kind of gain from this is that it corresponds to how much they are resisting usually, and I understand that and I can extrapolate how they may be feeling, right? So I know that, like, so for example, you get mothers, for example, who are narcissists, who would not necessarily feel, or psychopaths who would not necessarily feel bad about their children being taken. Yet we would assume that they would, but we're unaware of their sense experience, so we would, grieve with them nonetheless. We would comfort them nonetheless. Now, this is because, like, obviously, this is kind of like the hard problem of consciousness in some respects, isn't it? The subjectivity of another individual is their subjectivity and not ours, right? So I don't know qualitatively what they are experiencing in a way which is not built up from, ethical principles, where I go like, all right, I imagine that this is like, if I was to this being, and I'm understanding their behavior, and I understand, let's say, their biology and so on like that, I can understand and extrapolate that they are most likely feeling a high amount or a low amount of pain or something like that. If a pig's getting an electric shock or something. But if you were to say something like, I know that a human faces more pain than an animal when it's being electrocuted, simply because the human knows it's being electrocuted, is an absolute jump. We don't have access to who's feeling more or less pain or pleasure. All we know is that they are feeling pain and pleasure, and to varying degrees. And we can make educated guesses, perhaps, but we can't get like absolute values. There's no reason to think that a pig, for example, with greater physical sensitivity in many ways than a human, we know that they've got sometimes, like animals have better eyesight. We know that animals have greater overall like senses of smell. There's no reason to believe that they don't sometimes also have greater senses for physical pain. So, a human being electrocuted, having an existential crisis from being electrocuted, might be pretty bad, but it mightn't be as bad as the physical pain that, let's say, a cow, a chicken, or a pig experiences just because of their physicality, just because of their physical nature. And that's the point I'm getting at.
Wait, so I do just let me know something quickly. I mean, I think that if it's the case that certain animals are capable of feeling more pain than humans, then I think that's a reason for why those animals have higher moral status.
I wouldn't agree.
Not the reason. So I would just like concede.
I wouldn't. I would say that we don't know what an individual's pain or pleasure responses are in terms of qualitative value.
I was saying that if we could know.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's like, but I'm not willing to even posit the idea, because we just can't know. So in so much, I would say that ethics, this is where Regan makes, I think, a really good argument. We don't value the experience itself. We value the experiencer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I mean, it seems to me that your argument is you begin with this analysis of why sentience is bearing for moral statushood, and from there you go that animals have moral status, and then when I inquire about why that would mean, why it's the case that humans doesn't have moral status, given that they seem to have certain unique features such as agency, then it seems to me to be that your answer to that is that, well, agency, it's true that it gives it allows for different modes of, for example, suffering, such as this reflective suffering. But ultimately, that suffering is still going to be something which is experienced in sentience, and we have no way of knowing whether the additional part, this additional way in which humans can suffer, means that they can suffer more. Hence, we ought to be like epistemically neutral here, and hence we ought to only count this like basic suffering that is enabled by sentience qua sentience.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is that all that is valued is from sentience qua sentience. Not necessarily that for example, it's very possible that humans or animals do suffer more. It's not the point. The point is that all that is valuable is sentience. We aren't so the individual subject values their experience.
It really seems to me you're jumping back and forth between points now.
No, because like, if I will say it,
it's hard for me to understand why you would spend so much time arguing that we can't have access to the reality in which animals and humans suffer, but then also simultaneously say, actually that doesn't matter at all. All that matters is the value of sentience.
Yeah, because look at it like this. It's not about the content of the experience, qua rationality or qua rational principle, right? It's not that the experience itself is made valuable in relation to rational contemplation. The value that exists is the value that exists. That's all. The ontology, what is real, exists in senses, in sense experience, right? Pigs might not know that they are going to be sent to their deaths, and so they don't have the real pain response of existential crisis relating to their deaths.
Yes.
But they also don't have I will say they don't also have the benefit of things like religion and philosophy to help them cope with that sort of thing, or even breathe. Wait a minute. No, wait a minute. No, like, don't interrupt. I'll let you speak there. So in such, it's a modulation. The whole point is the human experiences dread in one circumstance. The pig does not. The pig experiences fear in one circumstance. The human does not. It's a modulation or a change of experience in terms of a change of experience, not an increase or decrease in value. We do not get access to, greater overall values. We get access only to subjects and subjectivity. It's only subjectivity that we are valuing here, not the objects that a subject is evaluating.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm still not sure I'm seeing the reason here. But perhaps I'll try to ask again.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Let's see if that helps. Okay. So is pain valuable in and of itself, or is pain valuable because somebody experiences it?
Because someone experiences it.
Yes.
Someone is suffering from it, yes.
Okay. And so that suffering is their subjectivity. It's not that there is a disembodied pain response, and if there was, it wouldn't matter anyway because there's no one suffering, right?
Yeah, so if you program like some computer code that has the like stimuli of pain, but the computer code has no sense of awareness, there's nothing wrong with the pain that the computer code is responding. Yes, cool.
So are we valuing the experience, or are we valuing the experiencer?
We're valuing the way in which let me just put a clause in here. So I mean, I don't believe all moral status is reducible to like pain and pleasure responses. But so let me just have that clause in there. But yeah, insofar as we are focusing on the value of pain and pleasure, then what we are valuing is the way in which experiences affect the experiencer.
So we are valuing the experiencer who is having experiences.
Yes.
Okay. So when I'm considering subjectivity, why should I consider the subjectivity of a human more than a pig if I'm valuing subjectivity?
Because they have the disposition to have different types of experiences.
Why would different mean greater or lesser?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to mean greater or lesser.
So what reason do I have to give one?
I can admit that greater or lesser is gonna be something that is determined on a case-by-case basis. But the dispositions of humans to have different kinds of experiences that animals have, while simultaneously maintaining the disposition to have the same kinds of experiences animals have, enables humans to, by a hypothesis, to be disposed to experience greater degrees of suffering than animals. That just seems to be trivially true.
I would absolutely disagree. For one, I think you've assumed that humans are capable of having the same subject-object relation as animals, which is fundamentally untrue. Animals, and I mean this is instanced in so many ways, and it's one of the reasons that animals seem to be more instinctual than humans. Humans seem to be fairly instinctless. We replace our natures, quote unquote, with habit and nurture. Like this is the difference in psychology. Like the psyche of a human is vastly different to the psyche of an animal. So why would you think that a human?
Obviously, I think you can be charitable enough to give that we're only talking about the dispositions. Which in this instance, we're only talking about the dispositions which relate to the pain and pleasure experience.
Yeah, I am. Like, look, even if we take pain and pleasure experience, the way that the system of drives, quote unquote, like that, the way that our drives are moving through us, the way that they are sublated in humanity versus an animal are vastly different. A human cannot experience the life of an animal. It simply cannot. It has the same subjectivity. It has the same sentience. It has senses. But just because you think that just because it has senses doesn't mean that it has the same experience of sensation. That's the point. Look at it like this: a human can, when it's getting whipped, may grit its teeth and bear it. They may think of something different. They may try and focus themselves in such a way as to bear the pain, but an animal cannot do that.
And that's completely irrelevant. That humans have the opportunity to do that is completely irrelevant.
Yes, and not only can humans not do that, but humans do that, but humans may be incapable of having the same sense experience, the same intimacy with their sense experience as an animal. An animal, in, like, if I was to use Heideggerian terms, would be in a permanent ready-to-hand state. The way that it experiences reality would be purely intuitive. And that's based off how its objects are presented. But how a human experiences reality has been conditioned and changed to the point in which it's very, even its like sort of most fundamental dispositional states are, and it's even its reflexes have been conditioned to be have a differing value response than, let's say, a human would in nature. So we, like, quote unquote nature. So, like, saying that a human and an animal can have, like, a human has an animal's experience plus the psychology of a human is missing the point. It's more that a human and an animal are having variations of psychological experiences which come with a differing object-subject relation, and they have qualitative significance to how an individual will experience the world. But that experiencing of the world, that's only their subjectivity.
So let me throw a case at you to see if I'm following what you're saying. So it seems to me that you're denying this case. So if we take an animal, let's take some very like animal that is very similar to human. So let's take, I don't know, a chimpanzee.
Mm-hmm.
And you take a human and you put them in some type of torture chamber.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're going with chimpanzees, it gets psychologically complex, but
okay, let's take something simpler, perhaps. Let's take a pig. I mean, we're pretty similar to
we're
pigs,
pretty similar
right?
to pigs, yeah.
So, and you put them in some type of torture chamber where you have some kind of fucked up person who's just carving them with knives.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know that at one point, both the human and the animal, they can die. They can both pass out from having their neurology overridden by pain, and they can actually die from having their neurology overridden by pain, right?
Yeah, like the dive shock. Yeah.
Exactly, of the pain shock.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then it seems to be this way in which animals and humans, they can suffer out to the max extent equally. They can suffer equally in this fundamental sense that we can torture both of them until they either pass out, and then we could further torture them until they die of shock of the pain if we're sufficiently.
No, I think that what would be begging the question there would be what would necessarily trigger that response. In an animal, it might even trigger faster than a human. A human, being more stoic, might actually keep the pain responses down lower for a longer period of time and mean that they get tortured for longer. Or maybe they're super squeamish. They understand what's happening. They understand the knives going to cut them up. They see images and the horror in their mind, and they die sooner because they have a heart attack at the dread alone. So
okay, yeah. So let's just stipulate that isn't the case for this human.
Well, why would I do that? Let's just stipulate that, like, humans and animals are going to experience the same thing physically.
No, that's not what we're doing. Because you're saying that humans. I mean, come on, man. This is basic philosophy. You're saying that you're noting that humans have different dispositions, which in the case could allow them to experience the case either more or less. But I'm just saying, let's just take a case where there is a human who won't engage that. So there won't be a stoic human, nor will there be a human who, before the
But
they reach the pain
so
threshold where they and the
what
pig guy
human
will
are?
have this like reflection of previous
But
images, so they anticipate the pain
this
more. I
is
mean,
the
certainly it's possible that there are
this is
humans who aren't stoics and
wait a
don't
minute.
engage in
Yes,
that
of
type of
course there
behavior
is.
when experiencing
That's why
torture.
I said look, like, but this is a person by person basis, right? That's what the whole thing is, right? So like so when I'm talking about the universality of human, right? One, I think it's relevant to say that if some humans are like, if even on your basis, if I'm valuing that some humans feel more and some humans feel less, then I would be able to say that those people who feel less under your distinction here are actually worth less. Now, I think that's ridiculous, but I could say that they are worth less. And the ones that feel more are worth more. The same thing with animals, and again. So like this is the kind of point when you say like, let's just hypothesize that they are having the same physical experience. Well, no,
That's
like,
not what I'm hypothesizing. You're not following.
well, okay, sorry, were you saying that they could
I'm
have
doing
this?
something I'm doing something very basic. I am just asking whether or not it is the case that you can torture a pig and you can torture a human, both to the extent that they feel such pain that they die. Then instead of answering that question, you're trying to invoke different potential things the humans can do to modify their experience. And it's true that the
But
humans have the ability to modify their
I
experience.
already
But I'm asking
accepted.
just about the possibility of the
Look, I
basics
already
here.
accepted that humans and animals can die of shock, and that they can, but like that does. I don't necessarily know whether that all humans and animals would necessarily even feel the same pain and pleasure responses. Like I even pointed that out as an example before. I don't know whether the physical pain a pig feels is higher or lower than that of a human. What you could do, if you want, you could just say, okay, let's just take a pig. Let's take a human who has never been, who is just like psychologically animalistic. They do not have self-awareness.
No, why would that's
Because
getting off track. Let's just pause
and
that.
you can put them against a human who is self-aware. So you can take the pure subjectivity of a human, right? And you can put that against the agency of another human. That means that you could at least say like, okay, we accept, and I'm willing to accept that, okay, for the sake of being able to have any kind of normalization of an individual's pain responses. Although I think that it does actually even go up and down in terms of human responses. You can see that autistic humans, for example, are more or less sensitive to pain. So even in this regard, it wouldn't work. But let's say like we take two humans, and we assume that because of their humanity, that they are going to have at least very similar, if not identical, pain responses to the same things. The only thing that is different within them is that one human is self-aware and one human is not. Perhaps they have a learning disability or something that is preventing them from developing in the same way as a normal human has, or maybe they've had some sort of trauma to the brain or something like that. Now, in that scenario, you'd want to say that the self-aware human was worth more. And we can kind of go down that and we'll try and work that out.
Oh, so were you asking me a question?
Yeah, I'm just saying like let's just like if we use that example, let's go.
Yeah, so if there's a human who has the ability to perceive themselves as an agent through time and suffer this like existential dread, above and beyond suffering this 10 out of 10 pain, and another human can only suffer the 10 out of 10 pain, but they lack the capacity to have this like existential dread. Yeah, then that the former human have higher moral.
Where does the suffering greater, like why would you necessarily posit that the emotional existential dread is greater than the physical pain than the disabled
because we
human?
have stipulated that they both have equal physical pain.
So they both have equal physical pain, and in one moment,
and the other one also has this psychological suffering of themselves as an agent through time, which the former lacks.
so they have equal physical pain, right?
Yes.
We're just assuming that like at that moment in which the blade touches them, they have equal physical pain. Now, at that moment, we could say that the consideration of that, let's say, context would be equal. Would we not? Or would we say that they are?
Obviously, two agents are experiencing equal physical pain, that is equal for those agents.
Okay. And then in, let's say, the moments to come afterwards, one's pain response drops whilst the other's pain response continues in a form of existential pain. So one is experiencing, let's say, not more or less in terms of having greater capacity to feel pain, but is instead continuing to feel pain.
Yeah, they're experiencing some type of suffering.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we could again assume in this scenario that even when they are facing the physical pain, there is no reason to say, like, if we assume that they are facing the exact same physical pain, but they're like, as in having the pain responses, but their awareness of the pain was different, then they would be having a different experience of that pain, which is essentially like, for example, the human in this situation that's unaware, they're unaware of the scenario, so they don't feel one mode of existence, while the human aware of the scenario feels another mode of existence on top of that. Yeah, well, or at least next to that, because they're two separate experiences that are being that are following in sequence with each other.
Yes.
Okay, so in terms of the overall outcome there, we can see that one being suffered more than the other, and we're assuming that. Now, and if we were to posit, though, that this is purely to do with the fact that we have one person who feels an existential dread. So, like, we could posit, for example, an individual who is suicidal, and let's say they are relieved at the idea of dying. Do they matter more or less than the individual who is just feeling the pain? So let's say the pain is followed by an experience of pleasure. Let's say they're a masochist,
you're adding further variables to what I thought was a pretty clean example.
Well, I think that the example is too simplistic. That's the issue. So this is the point I'm making. No matter what, like, one, we don't have access to the actual experiences, as I don't actually know, like, whether someone is feeling more or less pain. But even if we do, just say that the only thing that was different was the psychology of those beings. The psychology modulates, it changes the experience of pain, of the existential experience, in a way that doesn't modify the experience, the negativity of stabbing them, but really adds just another level of torture. So one is being existentially tortured whilst the other one is not. Yeah. Now that means that the scenario is not the same. It doesn't mean that their status isn't the same. It just means that the scenario is not the same for those two creatures. Right?
It seems to me that if I'm a person who has to choose, I'm forced to choose between torturing a person, in this case, the person who lacks the capacity for self-awareness but have the same neurology as the other human, and the human with the same neurology but who also has the self-awareness, and hence both of them can suffer on the neurological level equally, but the other one can suffer as an agent through time by virtue of being aware of the fact that they're suffering, then it seems to me I have reason to choose to torture the latter being, i.e. the being who lacks the capacity of self-awareness. And it seems to me to be the case that the reason I have is one that is explained by virtue of the other human having the property of being able to be self-aware of their suffering, i.e. they have different moral statushood than the former human.
See, I would say that what we are doing is saying that the physical context of suffering between those two agents is not derived simply from their being tortured, but their experience of understanding that torturing, like of that torture. So the human suffers not the same torture as the animal, right? Now, or the human in this case who is, not self-aware. But we could easily replace that same human with another human who suffers less than the animal because of their psychological disposition. The animal panics The human does not. The human
Okay.
breathes and controls that breathing and
Yeah.
regulates that pain responses, while the animal does not. But it doesn't
Okay.
seem that we would then say we should torture the human. So would you say it follows in this scenario that presented with a human and an animal, one human can regulate and distance themselves from pain. They are capable of psychological disassociation, which animals are not. And they are pretty proficient at it. Let's say they had a bad childhood. And so will experience less pain than the animal. Should we torture that human over the animal?
Obviously, it is the case that if we, like you, think that the only thing which grants moral status is the experience of the subject's pain and pleasure in the context of their sentience, and we are forced to choose between animal A and human B and torture them to the max, but it is the case that human B is some type of Buddhist monk who can like disassociate from all pain and hence not experience that pain, while the animal would like scream and wail and experience all the pain, then given the initial conditions of what we value when we are you, then obviously we should choose to torture the human.
Okay, and so what we can see there is
That
that
just follows from your
okay,
view.
okay. So what is then so that what we can see then is that from my view, human moral status, because of human moral status, like human moral agency, then does not entail greater evaluation of humanity simply because of their agency. It instead relates to their subjectivity and their experience within the world. So it's their subjectivity, which animals and humans share, and the evaluational process between animals and humans is not based on a universal principle qua agency, but rather is still subjectivity qua subjectivity.
Yeah, so I don't see how that follows at
How
all.
not?
Because
You just give me the example from my position that a human could be experiencing less than an animal.
yes,
Right? Now I'm saying, like, I think it's
but
nonsense to
yeah,
even talk about this because I don't think we'll have access to experience in this way. But even if we assume this, we can say that
yes,
a
if you
human
assume that
has less, a human has more or less experience of, can have more or less experience in a given context than an animal. Not necessarily more or not necessarily less. Mostly different. They have a different response. Humans, in this case, are valuable in relation to their subjectivity. Their subjectivity is different. Their agency does not necessarily mean that they have additional suffering. Now, what you wanted to argue was that they had additional suffering, that we take the animal's experience and posit additional suffering. But from your own example, you've seen that we have taken the animal's experience and then we can posit additional or lower suffering. So how is it that we can assume that the subjectivity of a human is always greater than the subjectivity of an animal?
okay, yeah. So I just need to make sure that you're like following this. Just because in an instance there could be a potential human, which in that instance would handle suffering better than an animal, that doesn't tell us about anything about the general conditions of humans and animals, right? You're following that, right?
Well, yeah, but I think that in terms of accessing the actual subjective experience, I don't think there is any general conditions that we'll have access to. Do you think I have access to an individual's pain and pleasure responses? Like, I don't know what an individual feels when,
But
like,
I mean, one argument you can make is you can make the argument that look, we know that beings can suffer, and we know that this suffering takes part in in the subjectivity that is their sentience.
mm-hmm,
But this is the only thing we can know about suffering and
mm-hmm,
subjectivity and
yep.
sentience. Hence, by virtue of this being the only thing we can know, we should just suspend our judgment about moral status differing between humans and animals, and hence we should treat them as having equal moral status. Now, that's one argument you can make.
I think that the more important thing to recognize there is that regardless of, if I may, regardless of with whatever else in terms of agency, the moral status of humans and animals is in relation to the subjectivity of the animal. What's in question is whether a human subjectivity is de facto experiencing more positive or more negative than an animal in and of itself. We are still looking at only subjectivity. What we are really looking at is whether the status of an animal and a human are higher or lower simply because one has more or less positivity or negativity than the other. So regardless, the universal principle here is sentience. What we are really talking about is whether a human is more or less sentient than an animal. And I'm saying that not only can we not know that, but it's nonsense to talk about. It is merely different.
Well, sorry, but I mean, those claims are just incompatible, because you can't say simultaneously that we can't know about how the comparison would cash out, and then assert that they're different. Because
yes, we can.
We can't assert that they're different if we can't know what they are.
I mean, like, one, I would say that our understanding of an individual's experiences comes from, let's say, their resistance, and so we extrapolate based off behavior. And I think that's just how much pain do you feel from 1 to 10? And you say 7. Is your 7 the same as my 7? How do I know? Like, even though we're both self-aware, we're both communicating in perhaps a much more functional medium than behavior, maybe less functional in some respects, because it allows for deception and judgment. But, let's just say you say 7. How do I know that your 7's my 7? How do I know whether I should give you, if I'm your doctor, whether I should give you morphine or paracetamol?
Because we create scales of comparison.
Well, what's the scale of comparison? So I say to you, like, in your experience of pain in your life, so you, like, if it was the same as burning yourself on a stovetop versus being stabbed by a million needles.
They actually can, like, in like sophisticated lab settings, test like the pain of like humans to see what, like, objectively how much pain they're being caused.
No, they can't.
But even if we don't take that into account,
they can't do that.
Create scales. Yeah, we can. So we create like scales which humans compare. But I mean, sorry, I'm getting a bit frustrated.
That's physical reductionism.
It seems to me that you're, on the one argument you're making is the argument we can't know. The only thing we can know is that they are capable of suffering in this subjective
So
sense.
I have that you are like me, so I make assumptions that, like me, you experience pain and pleasure off your subjectivity. Okay, so I see you as a subject. Now, based off your behaviors, I try to understand whether whether you're having a positive and negative relationship, and to what degree, based on your resistance. And your communicate and what's being communicated. I don't actually have access to that experience. That is the hard problem of consciousness. I do not read your mind. You tell me I feel pain number 7. I go, all right. Well, a pain number 7 for me is like burning my hand on a stovetop. Whilst what you could be trying to communicate is that pain number 7 for you is the same thing.
I understand all of what you're saying.
No, but wait a minute. Let's just say, like, you could even be communicating the same thing, burning your hand on a stovetop, but the actual feeling is different. And I mean, look, we can even point this out in terms of autistic people, have more or less pain sensations related to the same sense stimulation. So you can put autistic people in the exact same scenario as a non-autistic person, and they will suffer more or less. Like, and you pointed out before,
I'm getting so fucking confused right now. Because on the one hand, you say we can't have this pain comparison that is meaningful in any way because of the hard problem of consciousness. But on the other hand, you're saying that, we know that autistic people in certain conditions suffer more or less. So there are some ways in which we can valuably compare suffering.
So when we compare suffering, it's rough. It's not like, it's based off behavior and communication. It's not based off like direct, like, conscious awareness of an individual's experience. And since we can't access the consciousness of a pig, I don't know if a pig is experiencing physically the same suffering as the existential dread. Like, how would I even
then your argument for why humans and animals have the same moral status is an argument from epistemic uncertainty.
Well, it's more that it's not even epistemic uncertainty. What I'm saying is that I think it's nonsense to talk about. I think it's nonsense to try and put pain in purely quantitative terms. I don't think that's what pain is. Pain is something that's experienced and it's incompatible. That's what my argument is.
Okay, so your argument is that given that your argument is that animals potentially suffer in a way that is very different from human. I mean, it's possible, right? Even in your conceptions, that animals and humans can suffer in the same way.
Yeah,
Like that is like
absolutely.
possible. You
Totally.
can't rule that out by virtue of your own ontological commitments.
No.
So then your argument, it has to be that, well, they could potentially suffer different than humans, and humans could potentially suffer different from animals. We can't know, hence we can't make any claims as to what kind of species suffer more or less. Hence, given that we can't make these claims, we ought to just adopt this like epistemically humble state of being, where the only thing we should count in terms of their things that give moral status is the fact that they have this basic sentience that enables them to suffer and not suffer in the first place.
One, I think that you're saying like we hold this basic count, like what makes them suffer is sentience. No, even if they did suffer more or less, it would be sentience. The point of what I'm saying is that
they're suffering in sentience. Yeah, they're suffering in sentience.
Both are suffering through sentience, regardless of what we say about the mind of the animal or the mind of the human. They are both suffering qua sentience. So what is being valued here is sentience. We agree on that, yeah?
Yeah, but if it was, in your view, if it was the case, hypothetically, that there was some being out there, and we could know for a fact that their ability to suffer and experience pleasure through sentienceness was so much greater than humans or so much greater than animals. And if we know for a fact that these different types of experiences in sentienceness in relationship to suffer were something that could be put on a scale and compared, then it would follow from your view,
if it was quantitative,
they have different.
Yeah. So if it was quantitative and not simply qualitative, so that's the distinction. But then we're assuming
then it would follow from your view that they have different moral status.
Yeah, this would be that would if I was a utilitarian. I mean, that's like that like that would assume that I was again a utilitarian or like some sort of or a consequentialist in that respect.
And then you don't. The reason right now for why you say that we should view them as being equal in status is a reason based on the fact that we don't know about the comparability of their subjective experience in relationship to suffering, but we do know that they both can suffer, and hence that's the only thing we ought to value. That is your argument, right?
Sorry, could you restate that? I couldn't hear that properly.
Your argument then is that the reason for why we ought to treat them equally, why we ought to view humans and animals as having equal moral status, is because we don't know how to measure and compare their suffering and how they suffer in terms of their subjectivity. But we do know that animals and humans have subjectivity and can suffer, hence the latter is the only thing that counts, given that we can't do given that we don't know whether we can do the comparison of the former kind.
Well, I guess I would probably say rather than don't know, it would be can't know. And I think that's metaphysically important.
But you can't say can't know, because you can't know that. If you can't know, then you can't know that you can't know. That just follows.
Wait, what?
From what it is.
You're just trying to Meno's paradox this. Like I can't know that I can't know that. Wait, what?
Yeah.
So why can't I know that logically something that is purely qualitative cannot be put in quantitative terms?
No, because you're assuming now that what you're doing is you're assuming that you can't compare animal suffering and human suffering, right? That is an assumption. Well, if we could compare the two, then your argument wouldn't work.
Well, no. Like, look at it like this. How could I compare? Like, look, it's like, would I experience your experience through your experience, or would I experience your experience through my experience, right? So even if I hardwired your brain into mine, like somehow via magic managed to make your qualitative experience become attributable and understandable to my own, what I would experience would be my experience of your experience. This is the hard problem of consciousness.
What I'm saying is that for me, and I think for the vast majority of humans, it makes sense to think that if you stick a knife in my leg and you stick a knife in another human's legs, those humans are gonna have experience almost identical types of pain and suffering, holding
Like no,
other variables
no, like there's no reason to think that.
equal.
Like what we can say is
Okay,
that like we can both say that there is
again,
something
oh my God,
that there
you
are
say
most
there's
like
no reason to
that it
think
would
that.
be
So
that it
it's
would be
an
the
argument
same.
from epistemic uncertainty.
No, I'm saying that there is no reason to think that it would be the same. I mean, we can think that they are like so. For example, if I relate my experience to your experience, what I'm actually doing there is I am creating a universal in terms of what is a like something like when I talk about pain, I'm talking about a universal. I'm not actually talking about a particular, I'm talking about a universal. Its instancing is individual to me in this sort of particular sense, but its universality when I say the word is like is instanced in everyone's experience of pain. Yeah? Like it is a negative. Like when we describe pain, what do? We don't go like I felt number 5. It was really bad. What I say is I felt something which was negative. I felt something which was sometimes we'll put it in terms of other synonymous sense. Even if I go like, did you feel like a 7? I'm really saying like when we talk about pain. And we're talking about various scenarios of pain. How would you kind of say like this related to your experience of pain? And overall, what we do is we make judgments based off our behaviors around pain. Now, we assume all humans feel the same as us, but we have found that to be wrong based off the amount of resistance and even what is being communicated from other people. Like autistic people go, oh no, I actually wasn't feeling the same pain there. Like you can burn me and I don't, then they don't react in the same way, or they'll go like, or they'll hear a loud noise and they'll be like, oh my god, did you not hear that searing, like did that cause you searing agony? And we'll be like, oh no, that like this is a different mode of subjectivity. And so what we are doing there is when we talk about pain, we're not saying like, oh right, yeah, you felt, even if we did feel the same pain, we could go, all right, well, it's reasonable for us to go like, all right, so based off your reaction and my reaction, assuming that we will react the same to the same pain scenario, like pain relationship, then your reaction is indicative of a worse response. It's not that I know it is, it's that I'm going to assume it is, right? And now I'm happy to say that based off the resistance of an individual, based off the behaviors of an individual, that we are seeing a higher or lesser pain response, right? And that's our epistemic relationship with pain, like in terms of a sort of quantitative measure, like how much or less pain an individual's experiencing is really put in terms of their subjectivity, of their will, right? How much are they trying to flee from it or embrace it? That is all we have access to in terms of pain. Now, you mentioned as well, like, oh, well, we can look at like neurological scans. No, like again, like the structure of an individual's actual nervous system may give us like if like insight, like we may be able to extrapolate. Like, look, it's reasonable for us to think that they are actually feeling more, but only if again it either communicates more or they are reacting with more or less. Because otherwise, we don't know the structure of their psychological states, which are modulating those pain experiences. Remember, it's not just what they are sensing, and how they are sensing it. It's how they process that sensation, right? So, like overall, in this scenario, what is being evaluated is sentience. That is absolutely clear. And in so much as we relate to each other in an ethical relationship, it's based off behaviors associated with pain behaviors. I never get access to pain itself or pleasure itself. I get access to pain behaviors. And in assuming you are equal to me and you have a pain behavior that is excessive or lower to me, my evaluation of you, the same as my evaluation of myself, shows how much or less I should aid you in achieving your goal. Do you see what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I see. I just don't think any of this makes sense. But yeah, so I think what makes sense to do right now is that I'll just give a final remark on this part, and you can respond
So
to that.
why
And
doesn't
then
it
I'll
make
present.
sense? No.
So then
Why doesn't it make sense? If you rather than just say I don't think it makes sense. Okay, skeptic. Why doesn't it make sense?
Well, it doesn't make sense because I don't think anything of what you've said here would lead me to believe that it is not the case that humans have like different dispositions from animals, which allows them to have higher order experiences of suffering and pain and gives them higher order moral status.
Okay, so higher order suffering in terms of depends on what you mean by higher order, because I think that can again. I've already said that I agree with different. I've already said that I agree with different. I've already said that I think that a pain response can be expressed through resistance. I said that there's no reason to believe that a human has in any given scenario greater pain or less pain than an animal in terms of
there's
in that
my
pain
disagreement.
themselves.
I think humans
So,
have the disposition
but
to
why?
experience greater pains than
Why?
animals, and I think that humans having this general disposition gives them, even on your view, higher moral status
Why do you
than
think they
animals.
have that position? Why?
I think they have the dispositions of being self-aware. I think they have the dispositions of being agents who can reflect on themselves as beings over time. I think they have the dispositions to form rational interests. I think they have the dispositions to form more deeper connections, generally speaking, than animals. I'm not saying this is true for every animals. And I think the fact that humans have these dispositions and animals lack these dispositions are perfectly clear. I think that humans having these dispositions enables them to experience greater degrees of suffering than animals.
Why greater?
Not in every sense,
So
but
we've got different.
generally.
I get different. So you've said no. Wait a minute. So like let's just no. I haven't finished asking the question though. No, I haven't finished asking the question because I get that you mean different. I've said that you've said different. They have humans have the capacity to feel through time. Humans have the capacity to suffer. Wait a minute. So humans have the capacity to feel through time. Humans have the capacity, like through existential dread, they have the capacity to make emotional connections, perhaps that animals can't, and suffer emotionally in that respect. And humans have, for example, ways to modulate or suffer more, even in relation to their own physical pain responses, right? Or less, right? And that depends upon the psychology of the individual. Yeah. Okay, so I understand different. Why are we assuming more?
I'm giving a reason for why more, and my reason for why more is because at the base level of the experience of suffering, i.e. pain and pleasure calculus, humans and animals, generally speaking, both have that capacity, so they both can suffer in that regard. But given that humans have this other regard in which they can suffer, that can add on to their suffering.
Okay, so let's say I have the capacity to suffer. Let's say I have the capacity, to suffer, I don't know, psychically, but only when there is another psychic being around me. But there isn't another psychic being around me, let's say for 5 parsecs, right? That's somewhere deep in space. And so I never come into contact with them. Does my capacity to suffer psychically have any bearing on whether I suffer more or less than other humans? Do I have greater value than other humans because I can suffer psychically?
If that is a relevant part of evaluating whether or not I ought to do a specific action or set of actions, then yes, that disposition, if being a relevant part of my evaluation, means that you have higher moral status and gives me an additional reason to act less ill will towards that being given the comparative reason I have to act with ill will towards humans. I just want to note something I think was like funny. I just thought it was like funny earlier that you could like complain about my examples not being realistic enough, and now like having an unrealistic example yourself.
Okay, I'll make the example more realistic. I'll make the example.
No, I don't care about that. I think like unrealistic examples are like perfectly fine.
No, I'm just making a.
You got my answer, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what all I was saying clearly was that humans are being given a different mode of sensation to animals, right? And that differing mode of sensation is somehow placing them on a higher pedestal in terms of status. Now, we can both agree that in how we consider an individual is, and as we did at the start, how we consider an individual is not based purely off how they sense, but what they are sensing. Like, are they the contexts of what they are sensing? So, putting, let's say, a human and torturing them psychologically versus torturing an animal, we could say, look, the animal will actually overall not experience the same the same negativity as the human, or they might experience less. And you even said that in your own example, that in this, some humans may experience more, some may experience less. And that consideration will change how we have duties towards each other. But that duty is not coming from anything other than subjectivity. The moral status remains the same. The consideration of that status is based on the particular contexts in which we are describing the status, which is why I said, if we were to simply posit that there was a being, a human, who could experience something that other humans could not, but then it had no relevance to the experience's actual pain or pleasure sensations, why would I value that being more for its capacity? For its capacity alone. Why would I value that being?
Because in certain cases, certain dispositions are going to matter more.
No. In certain cases is missing the point, because we are talking about the universal principle of moral status. Moral status is that one is higher than another. You're saying that humans are de facto higher than another. Not in context, but overall. Wait.
Obviously, it's going to be the case that you can draw up a scenario where I have higher reasons to help an animal than I have reasons to help a human. That's very easy to come up with. For example,
not necessarily if one is of higher moral status.
If I have some water and I have a human who's thirsty, but who will make it if I don't give him that water? And I have an animal who, like a sea animal, who needs that extra bit of water to remain underwater, and otherwise it will die. Then in that context, even though it's the case that I think that humans have, generally speaking, higher moral status than animals,
okay, so now
I have reasons to prefer to give the water to animals.
Okay,
saying that a being has higher moral status does not mean that in every context, in every instance, we have an overwhelming reasons to prefer.
This goes against what we said in the start. So we made the distinction between impartial and partial duties. So there is like an impartial duty from which animals and humans share, and then there is partiality, which is contextually based and even institutionally based on normativity. So there is the meta-ethical principle of moral status, and then there is its normative expression. If we are talking meta-ethics, we've agreed that it's subjectivity. And if you're saying humans are generally, but not always, more valuable than animals, then that means that the animal status is relative to a human's is not always one of lesser. So humans are not of higher moral status than an animal. Now, if you were to say that a human status is of greater moral standing, and that an animal's is less, then I should always respect the human more than the animal. So if the human's desires, I mean, you could say like, okay, we don't have to totally disregard the animal. We could say that a human has half the moral status of an animal. So the most trivial desires of a human are not as important as the value of life for an animal. Okay. Okay. If we make that where it's like its rank is only half as much, right? Then what we can say is that obviously the human has greater moral status. But if you were to put, let's say a decision where it's like a human will feel emotionally dissatisfied with their life for a month, or an animal's life will die, we could then side on it's getting quantitatively hard to kind of measure out where these responsibilities lie, but we could say that we have a greater responsibility towards human life than animal life always, just based on the fact that humans in principle can feel differing modes of experience, not necessarily higher or lesser in any situation, but different. Okay, now I don't understand why we are making that distinction in status. Because it seems to me we've agreed that humans and animals relatively feel more or less based on the circumstances. So the status isn't what's determining the normative expression, that's the context. The status gives, value, and both are valuable, qua subjectivity. But the context is informing us of of how we respect that status. So what I don't understand is why one is of higher status, given that it's really only valuable based on its subjectivity still, and why one is of lower status based on that same subjectivity, when you said yourself it's entirely contextual, and only generally speaking would a human be more valuable, because you're assuming that animals feel less pain or pleasure in every circumstance. Now that sounds like it's begging the question.
Okay, so several things.
Yeah.
So first of all, I promise that if you go back in the recording after this, you will see that I explicitly said that I don't agree with the partial-impartial distinction. So that's first of all.
Really? Because you said to me that there was, because you said you agreed, and this is obviously, I don't know if I'm just going from the DMs, but it did seem like this. You said that you agreed that, I'll pull it up. You said that, where is it? My duties to an individual are not entirely dependent upon their status. Yeah?
Well, sorry, can you read that again?
My duties to an individual are not entirely dependent upon their status.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not entirely dependent on their status.
Yeah, we agree there. So if we were to say, let's say, the moral status of two humans, our duties are not necessarily equal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what we are considering, and what we are considering in humans and animals, in this scenario, is the same experience, right? The same or the same trait or characteristic, right? The subjectivity. So the moral status.
Yeah.
So the moral status here is being derived from subjectivity. Now the context is what's informing how we respect that subjectivity, not the status. Because if an animal was to experience more pain and a human less, you agree we should necessarily harm the human over the animal. But if I was to reverse the scenario,
I would agree on, so let's be clear. I would agree on your view that follows.
I know, because you're not making a positive claim.
I was gonna try to go to that, but then you wanted to.
No, I just wanted to make sure that it was implicit that in this scenario there is no reason to believe that an animal is given greater value than a human, because all you're doing is putting in context and then saying, in this context, a human, if it experienced more, should be considered in a greater degree. Now that's a normative claim, not a metaethical claim. So it's not about the status.
No.
So where's the metaethical claim?
No, what I'm saying is that on your view, again, it seems to me to be the case that it still follows that animals have higher moral status, because if we begin from the view, and if we ask the question, in our general ethical practices, who deserves to be further prioritized or mostly prioritized, animals or humans? And again, we're just operating under the paradigm of your frame of reference, i.e. sentience. Then it still seems to be that when asking these general questions, we have reasons to prefer or to value humans more due to the fact that they have the disposition to experience greater degrees of pain. And then what you and I are disagreeing about is whether or not they can experience greater degrees of pain. That is the disagreement here.
Well, this is, I don't actually think that is the disagreement. So you said that we have that we, one, can see that pain, right? Sorry, actually, do me a favor, restate that again, and I'll restate why I disagree, and then we can move on.
Okay, yeah. So I'll restate. So in this discussion of trying to determine moral status solely using the sentience of beings and the subjective experience of pain and pleasure and suffering in the context or through that sentience, it still seems to me to be the case that humans have higher moral status than animals. The reason it for me still seems to be the case that humans have higher moral status than animal is because when asking the general prior question to any practical cases of what species ought I, generally speaking, give more moral weight, i.e. more consideration to, we have reasons to give more considerations to humans. The reason for why we have reason to give more considerations to humans, it seems to me to be, even under your view, is the fact that humans have dispositions which enables them to suffer differently from animals. Now, I think that this differently implies that they, generally speaking, have the disposition to suffer greater than animals have. And the reason I think they have the disposition to suffer greater than animals have is because of the fact that I think that humans and animals can suffer the same in this very basic way of suffering, i.e. just experiencing pain and pleasure responses. But I do think that the humans' capacity to suffer in these different regards adds on to them to have the ability to suffer greater. Hence, it seems to me to be the case that even from your view, it would follow that humans, generally speaking, when asking the prior question of what species ought to be valued more, ought to be valued more by virtue of their moral status. And it seems to me to be the case that our disagreement is upon whether different means greater, and that your response here is to say that we don't know whether different means greater because we can't make those types of intersubjective comparisons.
Okay.
That's my statement.
Okay.
Feel free to respond.
Okay. So,
and then we move on.
All right. So, in responding to what species we should consider more, the response from this position, which is one that I think is not in any way related to my claim, because I don't think this makes sense, is the species that suffers the most, or suffers the least, or suffers in such a way that is more or less valuable, right? But against its own, against suffering. Now, the point I'm making is that suffering, and I've tried to be clear with this, is subjective in that it is qualitatively subjective. But what is objective is our judgments about suffering and our judgments about pain behaviors. And that allows us to create principles around suffering in order to best engage in our lives and in the lives of animals and so on. Now, so in considering the one that suffers the most, that would be, if we are positing this scenario, we would have to assume that if humans were to have a dispositional difference to suffer more or less, that could be evidenced. So you'd be able to say that humans do suffer more, and which is why they have a greater status. Just as if I was to say that pigs suffered more, they would have a greater status. Okay? And moreover, what we have to accept as well is that, I mean, we haven't even gotten into, like, let's say my foundational meta-ethics, which would not necessarily align perfectly with this, but the individual themselves psychological experience which made them generally suffer more, so that they would feel the same pain whilst feeling a different psychological pain on top of that. And that is the general experience. Now, I'm saying we do not have evidence for that. We have the evidence that humans can feel pain. We have evidence that humans can feel emotional pain. We have no ways to equate emotional pain and physical pain in humans versus physical pain in animals beyond pain behaviors. So we would have to, based off general pain responses, give evidence to that humans most generally or almost always experience greater pain or pain behaviors than animals. There is no such evidence. There is no evidence to say that humans do actually feel more pain than animals. They feel pain differently, and we would consider that in the scenario, but not feel more or less. And so what we are judging is subjectivity still. The moral status of both beings is equal. The context and the expression of that status is what determines our duties.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, okay. You wanted to move on.
Yeah. So,
you wanted to posit your positive case now?
Yeah. So, since the debate started like 51 minutes later than I thought it would have started, and I didn't.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The camera might be broken and stuff.
No,
I'm very
perfectly
sorry.
fine. I was wondering perhaps if we could make a part 2 of this, where I then present my positive case for why I think the proposition is false. Now that we have discussed, your positive case for why the proposition is true, and why I think that case doesn't make sense, and your responses to my responses, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, perhaps we could have a part 2 then, where I discuss my positive case. We could have it tomorrow, whenever, really. But because right now I would really have to go to eat because I'm like super hungry.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, if you could just give us like a basic idea of like what position you're kind of coming from.
Okay, yeah. So my basic idea is going to be that I think there are 3 main considerations for why humans have higher moral status than animals. I think, first of all, there is going to be an appeal to common sense morality. I think that appeal ought to be taken seriously to a significant extent. Secondly, I think there's going to be an inference to best explanation, which is to say that there are certain facts about our ethical landscape that can only be explained by virtue of the fact that humans have higher moral status than animals. For example, when it comes to considerations of fairness and justice, humans have a claim to be treated just, a claim which is grounded upon there being something about them which makes them appropriate recipients of justice and fairness. This is something which animals lacks, I think, and evidence that humans have higher moral status than animals. And then thirdly, when examining potential features which can potentially ground moral status, it just seems that humans have more of those. And I think that has to do with, for example, practical reasoning, dignity, the ability to value things, the ability to feel differently, and stuff like that. So I'm going to present a 3-part case that I think all point to the fact that humans have higher moral status than animals.
Okay. So just quickly off the top of my head, like obviously appeal to common sense. I think that's what, like, appeal to popularity. And then I would say the next thing would be appeal to, like you're saying, like our ethical landscape. Are we appealing to traditions? And then third, what is that? Like they have more. I would say that's you're equivocating on experiences. So like that an experience of, let's say, like a loss of dignity would be equivocal to let's say being stabbed or something. You could even see that an individual who at the moment of feeling undignified, and that was their experience rather than the physical experience of being stabbed, because you don't have to say that they feel both at the same time and that their experience can be modulated by that, actually felt less pain. So I don't know, man. I'm definitely game to engage with it, but as right now, no, I think that it's for the most part an appeal to tradition, and appeal to maybe.
Wait. I mean, I just quickly ran through like some
100%.
taglines.
I mean, 100%.
Well, you can't just say that you think that it's going to be an appeal to tradition.
Well, that's
and,
I mean, from what you've given us. So from what you've given us, appeal to common sense. I already said at the start, I'm unwilling to accept common sense as evidence.
okay.
The next thing you said was in terms of justice. Well, why can't an animal have a claim to justice. We have animal rights laws, and just
Yeah,
because
that's
they
what I
don't
was.
have, just
Yeah,
because we
I
don't,
assumed that that's what I was gonna go through in the next.
but it just seems that because we don't, even if we didn't have animal rights laws, it doesn't mean that they ought not exist. And then we have the, like that would be an appeal to tradition, right? And then the next thing would be
An
what we've
inference
argued
from
about the entire time.
explanation is not
So,
an appeal to
and
tradition.
that's why I said like if anything, I'll give you my two most initial thoughts and points of attack against your position. Now you have the opportunity to go and defend yourself against them, and we've got an idea of each other's positions ongoing. That's all I was intending to do here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I really took you as trying to be very snarky here in a kind of rude way. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were trying to get me to quickly state my position, and then you quickly dismiss it.
No, because we've got to have a
matter.
whole debate on that. So there's no sense in it's not oh yeah, your position's useless. What would be the point in the debate? No.
Yeah, cool. I just misunderstood what you were trying to do. I was like, what's going on?
Yeah, it's just this is what we'll debate. This is kind of the basis of why. Okay.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so we'll just be in touch over Discord, I guess, and set up the second debate, and the debate will be on the topic, in the line of reasoning here just established.
Yeah, I might need about a week. I need to order a new cable for my camera. I also need to record some stuff for my course and stuff. So it'll probably be a week, 10 days when I'll be free.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah,
okay,
we'll just figure out a date.
Sweet.
Right, this was fun. I'm sorry we couldn't get to my positive position and the comparative debate, but I'm sure we can do that next time.
No problem. Well, have a nice day anyways, mate.
Have a nice day.
Right. So, thank you everyone who's watched. I will be taking some questions. If you have any questions, just drop them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer. I actually don't know what happened when I disconnected there. I don't even know if I managed to even reconnect to the same event. I hope I hope I did. How's your day, PP? Well, it's actually up and down. Basically, I don't know how broken my camera is, so very down if it's broken as hell, I suppose. The thing is so yeah, why can you disregard common sense? I never said I could disregard it. I just don't see it as evidence in and of itself. I think evidence is rational and rational or empirical. It's either a priori a priori or synthetic. We don't have evidence that is just that thing that we all already agree on, unless we have a reason to agree on it. I don't think that an appeal to popularity is in any way evidence of a claim. What happened to my camera? It's the bloody cable. I hope it got caught, and essentially someone tripped over my bloody camera cable, and it's bent the cable. So I don't know if it's going to be okay, but we'll see. We'll see. Can you agree that there are varying levels of conscious experience in different species? I don't see why I would have to say that. Why would I say that there is awareness more or less to greater degrees in varying species? I have no idea. I don't know if there's a variation in humans. The only thing that we accept in terms of consciousness, in terms of sense awareness, is that there are beings who are sensing and they are acting as if they are sensing. We could say that there are variations in how they are behaving, and we can extrapolate from that there are variations in the sensations, but not necessarily variations in the qualitative value that we can have inherent knowledge of. I don't know if one being is conscious of pain more than another. I just assume that when both beings act in a form that shows pain behavior, resistance, that I take that with consideration. Socialism debate with MK. Who's MK? Yeah, I'm not a fan of common sense as a tool, other than like maybe like I think like it depends on what we mean by common sense as well, because like common sense in the colloquial sense versus common sense in a philosophical sense can be very different. So for example, common sense would be like usually things that we must like, and if you look at like Reed's arguments in terms of common sense, he's like, look, if I have to accept it, then why am I even talking about whether it's the case or not? We're just going to move on if I have to accept it. It seems to have a lot more philosophical grounding in the sense that it seems to be lacking like seems to be somewhat indubitable and stuff like that. It doesn't seem to be like, oh yeah, straight up like an appeal to like some sort of colloquial notion of agreement or consensus. Oh right, the guy I just spoke to. Oh right, I didn't know. I've never seen him called that. But I mean, if he wants to have a socialism debate, yeah. I want you to study the moral status of anything you ought to take form of intelligence and plans seriously. The only thing that makes sense and goes beyond vegan/non-vegan narrative. I don't understand what you mean. I think there are other ways to measure consciousness other than pains. I think that there is like only a value relation in the world. Like it's conscious awareness. I mean, you could say like responses. Like just I would say like what's a measure of consciousness is a measure of like behavioral change. Like I don't think there is a way to go beyond behavioral change. So yeah, indubitable means undoubtable. Do you think his position reduced to might makes right? I don't think it reduced to might makes right. I think that his position was an appeal to tradition. I think that his position was an appeal to common sense notions. Oh, humans have one experience and that makes it more valuable than another. And there's no reason for us to believe that. There's no reason for us to believe that simply because they have a differing experience that it is of greater importance. I gave the point that humans can have a variation in psychology which may lead to more or less pain. Whether humans simpliciter have more or less pain in any given scenario, or every given scenario, is one that needs to address. You need to say that humans are generally more capable of experiencing pain and pleasure. They are more, they have a greater sensitivity to pain and pleasure. Just because they have they have a variation of sensitivity does not necessarily mean that they have more or less. And even if they did, it wouldn't necessarily mean that they have more or less pain or pleasure in that respect, because overall the subjectivity of the individual is what we are considering. It's like, all right, humans as subjects experience X more in one scenario than another, whilst animals as subjects experience experience pain more than humans in this scenario. So it's not moral status issue then. Anyway, the moral status of humans and animals is equal. The context of how we express that status is changing. So that's why I was trying to separate in meta-ethics and normative ethics, which I thought as an analytic you would appreciate, because if we're talking moral status, I would say that's a meta-ethical principle. If we're talking its expression, we're talking normativity. So like, okay, humans as an expression of subjectivity. So humans are valuable qua sentience, the same as animals are valuable qua sentience. So the moral status is of sentient beings. How we express that sentience, that moral status, is contextual to the normativity of the context and our lives and so on, like institutions and so on. It was kind of wild that he ran into the "we can't know, humans must be superior." Yeah, I don't know why I said that, really. the way a microbe interprets reality is going to be drastically different than the way we do, how would our conscious experiences not differ? Well, we don't believe that microbes do experience reality. It's quite like, so I'd say the experience of reality is underpinned by a subject-object relationship, in the sense that it's a one that experiences like a spatial, posits the existence of space, changes its behavior in relation to objects in the world, has to show some sort of kind of acclimation and awareness of the world and modify its behavior of the world for us to infer that it is conscious, which is what separates, I would say, what separates animals from microbes and plants. Plants seem to react but not modify behavior the same way as microbes do. I also think, obviously, that in my argumentation, I also think that the subjectivity of the individual entering ethics is what is of significance, because otherwise this wouldn't make sense. Like when I would say that we begin from subjectivity, I actually mean our own. I don't mean, ethics begins from the subjectivity of the ethical foundations in our state, and as such is an analysis of what's going on in nature in terms of value. It's not something that is indifferent to our subjectivity. It's directly related to the expression of our subjectivity, which is the motivational force for us to enter into this epistemological field. It's the same reason why we'd do something like science or engage in art or something like that, because there is some sort of value which is which holds direct relevance to our lives, and we can understand that. Would you say that most things that are known as common sense are probably ranked higher in terms of things that are close to human nature? I don't know what you mean there. So one, I don't accept a human nature in and of itself. Like, as in, if you mean human nature in terms of like physical form, yeah, fair enough. But if you mean human nature in terms of like positing a natural end for humanity, like humans, like the good life for a human is this, or humans are likely to behave in this way, I don't think that those exist. I think that in terms of, if you were to say like, when I talk about common sense, I think that there are just popular consensus, but not necessarily evidenced. I mean, like in a colloquial sense. If we're talking like philosophical common sense, that depends upon the actual thinker. So if you're like Thomas Reid or something, but like not the colloquial notion of common sense. I just think that it's popular consensus. Common sense is like, oh, we all agree with this, right? Yeah, humans do have a very high variability for IQ, and things like that. So, what I was trying to even show is that even in terms of pain responses, we've found that humans don't even, like in terms of like, for example, autism, and in terms of like base sense responses, in terms of existential issues, it becomes much more complex. It's modulated by your childhood. Like, did you experience abuse as a child? Because if you did, you're probably more capable of dealing with abuse as an adult, because you've got the capacity for the psychological disassociation. And so you may face hardship in a way which is, you've been prepared in a sense for the hardship, and so when you experience it, you don't necessarily feel the same as other people. So in terms of like psychological variation or like psychoanalytic variations within individuals, like variations in psyche, like those are not generalizable to the point in which I can go, all humans experience this more than this. So I don't know what I would necessarily be evidencing other than human behaviors. Like, all right, well, what we know is that humans in the same scenarios as animals experience more pain or more pleasure, which is just not necessarily the case. We see that humans in given contexts can experience pain and pleasure where animals can't, but we also see that animals sometimes seem to experience pain and pleasure in contexts we can't. So it's a difference. It's not a higher or lower. It's a modulation. I just don't understand how he's even extrapolating to like all right, we take animal experience and add human experience to it. No, mate, you are an animal. Your experience is just different. I don't know. I thought that was pretty self-explanatory. Or actually, I thought I explained it a lot. And yeah, anyway, maybe not self-explanatory. I think I just said it over and over again. I've asked a few vegans this. I'm a vegan too. If I'm able to forego the need for consumption of plants, assuming that our needs are taken care of somehow, should we? Probably. I mean, just for the sense of animals, not necessarily plants themselves. I don't think there is a reason to assume that plants have any sort of consideration in and of themselves. But like, you know, if you could avoid causing additional harm to the environment and stuff, which animals like, you know, live in, that includes humans, then yeah, you probably should. Okay. Right. So thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this stream. Sorry I haven't been able to show my face and so on throughout this, but hopefully next time I will be able to. So anyway, have a nice evening, and as always, try to gain some perspective.